in a province just north of Tibet, in a town called Xining, which we reached after a 7-hour car journey from Lanzhou. Usually countries of any political persuasion are eager to show the brightest side of their country. And it's to the credit of the Chinese that they are willing to show us parts which are still very backward.
The road out of Xining is paved but in poor repair. Whereas other parts of China are in full and evident development, here everything is redolent of struggle, if not of stagnation. The fire brigade is always ready to put out fires with exemplary efficiency, but here there isn't that much to burn. Men work hard to counter this feeling of neglect, but even the military seems to show restraint in these gravel gray surroundings. Xipa village. Here no white face has ever been seen. Marco Polo himself could not have created more amazement. Or consternation. Or awe. Or rage.
That is the 11th dog I've seen in China since I arrived, because they're not allowed in big cities, so there's none in Beijing. 1 or 2 outside, usually very small. And here's a ferocious-looking dog, which is tiny, a symptom of a Chinese sense of balance. They don't need big, brutal things to guard their clay walls. They have a minute dog, which is already hoarse from years of barking. These walls are very interesting because they're made between 2 parallel pieces of wood and then built up layer by layer. And because of the cold, dry climate, they can stay for a very, very long time without needing repair or renewal. They also serve to break the wind, which is sometimes very ferocious along these plains. In these remote areas, there's obviously no question of electricity or of gas. These things are far too expensive, could never be afforded by anyone. And so the provincial government has given each family one of these solar burners. And here, slowly cooking, is some valuable water.
Medical aid is carried out methodically and with increasing frequency. Until recently, babies could only be inoculated against the 6 killer diseases once a year. Now it is every 2 months. One would have thought that the polio pill would be more effectively administered with a spoon. And the babies seem to agree.
This is the poorest state in China, the poorest province. The average wage here is of 237 yuan a year, which means about 60 American dollars a year per head. It's a very, very rugged existence indeed. And it seems to be just as rugged behind me from what I can hear. I can't look at that.
The shepherd enters the cave and becomes a barber, a far cry from the hectic jollity of Australia. But then caves are reflective places, unlike sheds. Here, they are habitable.
Ah. Sissy. Sissy. Well, I've just come out of a cave. There's another one there. They're all over the place here. Many people live in them. And in case this should seem to be strange, it's rather interesting to evaluate the history of caves in Chinese civilization. They're very simple inside.
This lady is doing what goes for the silver. The cave is decorated with Spartan economy, but with little bursts of relative luxury here and there. The pillows are spotless, and the sentimental calendar figures liven the walls. The great march of Chairman Mao began in just such a cave.
Yes, as I said, caves play a very important part in China, ancient and modern.
Mao Zedong was young when the long march set out in 1934. With a mere handful of supporters by Chinese standards, 100,000 men. They crossed China gathering support and spreading the word in one of the most ambitious and heroic public relations operations in history. Their vigor in opposing the Japanese invasion of the mainland brought them massive popular support in the regions they had occupied. And with the defeat of Japan in 1945, the ensuing vacuum left the nationalists of Chiang Kai-shek and the communists of Mao face to face. In 1950, despite the help of the United States, the nationalists were driven out of China and onto the island of Taiwan, where they are to this day. There was now nothing in the way of China's becoming a cohesive nation once again, after all the upheavals of the modern era. The collapse of a corrupt and feeble empire, the attempt at liberal democracy by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the truculent nationalism of Chiang Kai-shek, the incursions of the Japanese, and finally, the long march, the victory of heroism, sacrifice, rewarded. Mao was now alone at the helm. Now China has a chance to think of other things than conflict and survival. Her long one-time association with the Soviet Union shows in the influence of the daintier aspects of the Russian ballet. But Radio City Music Hall is not forgotten. Here is the jolly dance of the young reforestation pioneers, eager to plant a few trees to suitable arbor music. Mother, why isn't that man planting a tree?
This is an eye-opener and a heart-warmer. Yes?
She's miles from Budapest, but she launches into this Hungarian dance with amazing abandon. even if one critic does not seem entirely convinced. Our short march has changed direction. We are now on our way back to values we know from those we could not even have guessed at. We're on our way to Xi'an, one of China's most ancient capitals.
The Emperor Hongwu in 1374, and it lasted until 1378, caused this great wall to be built round the capital city of Xi'an. It's curious that in modern days, many of the white elephants of history, such as the Great Wall and Versailles, for instance, which seemed tremendously lavish follies of royalty at the time. The Great Wall never succeeded really in keeping anybody out. They have become paying propositions owing to the fact that they are now tourist traps. Whereas this Great Wall, 14 kilometers long, with a deep moat all the way around the city, is now, of course, since the city has grown, right in the middle of the city.
Not bringing tourist money in, but merely blocking traffic during the peak hour. And that's the penalty for not being a white elephant.
By the standards of Xi'an, this is a relatively recent construction, 1384. And it was the bell tower in which the great bell used to toll when the enemy was attacking. There's the great bell, it's still there and intact. Since then, it's been used for different purposes. The floor I'm on is described as a briefing room nowadays, whatever that may mean. And it was where prisoners were kept during the Civil War. We've all heard of the Chinese water torture, one drop at a time. I think to be a prisoner here must have been subjected to the Chinese traffic torture. Hundreds of bicycle bells through day and night, almost within arm's reach.
Ancient buildings act as magnets to ancient people, who look at times like architects returning to the scenes of their folly.
How are you? All right? You look quite at home in ancient surroundings. You are?
82 and a half years old. Well.
Well, we're getting on like a house on fire.
Or rather like a pagoda on fire.
This pagoda, believe it or not, the pagoda of the greater wild goose, was built in 652. And that's at a time that I really can't remember what was going on in Europe or in America, of course, very little indeed. It's a pagoda which has 1,897 rooms, with 300 monks in permanent residence to this day, living in utter seclusion. Since I calculate that they have 5 empty rooms between each one of them, that is not tremendously difficult.
Impervious to the swirl of tourists, jostled and stepped on in their celestial introspection, the monks continue a tradition which came to China when Shan Zhao crossed into India and became converted to Buddhism, and on his return built this pagoda to house the books of learning. Today, as always, devotion is a very private thing, even in a very public place.
I'm looking for the great mosque, which is down this lane, I'm told.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you? That's very clever of you.
How are you?
Extremely well, still. Since you asked the last time, nothing much has changed. Yes, you've seen my fountain pens. You will? Bye-bye. Drive carefully. Ah, I think this is it. The great mosque.
Oh, yes, this is the Great Mosque, all right. The Chinese government has given large subsidies for the rebuilding and repair of mosques. And although these funds are received with gratitude, we can read on the faces of this community that they have an inherent belief in self-reliance. To a point of detachment. The reconstruction of a place of worship is at least as meticulous as was its construction. There are two aspects of everything: their overall impression and the incredible detail. And the mind and memory waver between the two. The same is true of people. At first sight, forbidding, even remote. A study of the detail will bring out surprising light and shade. A great proportion of China's life is lived outdoors, and materials as well as men are exposed to the elements. They must be tough inside, but elegant and felicitous to the view.
Everything in China is very influenced by nature. Their poetry, their thought, their imagery always has some reference to nature. And in the Chinese theater, there are those moments when you're supposed to be more excited, when there's a series of percussion instruments, a kind of rustle of percussion instruments. And I am personally absolutely sure that that extraordinary noise where you're supposed to become more tense is really inspired by the cicadas that you hear all over China. There's a breath, a waiting period, and then suddenly, here it starts. I'm sure of it. This is the Huaqing Pool, and a little palace built around hot springs by the Emperor Xuanzong in the Tang dynasty in 747 AD. He built it specifically, this little place, for his favorite concubine, Yang Fei, who was a very capricious, obviously very beautiful and desirable young lady, but who had a passion, a real passion for light cheese. and she had to have them fresh every morning. So the emperor instituted a kind of relay race of people not carrying the Olympic torch, but going to faraway Sichuan, which is the place where the best lychees come from, and the freshest, and running over the landscape and bringing these things back. Many of them perished underway. And the angry poet Tu Fu of that period wrote the lines, "Within the vermilion gates, the food and wine go bad, while outside bodies lie dead along the frozen road." Well, that was a long time ago. We can at least understand why the emperor built this place. If not for himself, then at least for a lychee-loving lady. Mistakes make people fallible. She's grinning all over her face. I can see her. And she's playing much better than I ever could at any age. We're in the soundproof rooms of the Xi'an Normal University, which is a big, huge university, and also a teacher's college, which trains teachers for all over the northwest of China. Also those provinces that we've visited up to now. We know that China influenced European interior decoration a great deal, and even architecture at the end of the 18th and beginning of the 19th century was probably the culminating point of Chinese influence, with chinoiserie and everything. And here, it is the Turkish influence on Mozart, which is really very interesting to see the Turkish influence on Mozart being carried to China, which in itself has influenced us in the past, and probably Mozart too. These young ladies are almost exclusively from the northwest territory of China, where there are minorities. It's many different tribes. The lady playing the harmonica behind me is herself from a nomadic family from up near the Russian border. And the music is already rather different to the Chinese music. The interesting part of all this is that these young ladies are teachers who are being trained to teach other teachers, because the whole program of education in China was very retarded by the Cultural Revolution. Many of the teachers at the moment are not fully qualified, and in order to teach young children, and instead of having the traditional didactic Chinese approach, they are trying now to find out and to draw creativity out of children. In other words, to make the talents of individual children more apparent, and to give them, the children themselves, a greater autonomy, a greater initiative than in the past. For some reason, this is harder work than when I was at school and being forced to do it. Well, I'm aware that my enthusiasms may seem slightly insane at times, and I know that I have been accused of being naive about them. And yet I think, personally, that they're justified, and I might as well explain myself. I think one of the troubles with the world is that we're all at different stages of our development at the same moment of history. And different political systems suit different countries. I can't understand how one can expect democracy in a country which is not literate. Here there is a lot to do. It's a great nation, a very civilized nation, which has had periods of degradation, deprivation, and depression. And they've got a system now which they chose out of many others, and now it has a kind of enthusiasm which is infectious. At least I believe it to be, and it is as far as I'm concerned. Here is this park in the middle of Xi'an, which is in the grounds of the old imperial palace. One can see one or two pagodas, which are much older than the park, because the park was built in 1956.
It was built by the men, women, and children of this city in their spare time on a voluntary basis as a gesture towards their own community, so that there would be grace and pleasure in their moments of relaxation. I have no need to tell you that today is Sunday. It is like Sunday in the park anywhere. But perhaps people enjoy more that which they have made themselves.
There are many thousands of legends in China, and this is perhaps one of the nicest. Up on top of the mountain lived Nuha, the old mother. And the old mother was lonely, living all alone on the earth, so she created the human race. Not perhaps one of her better ideas. And she did this by taking yellow clay, making little molds, and breathing life into them, and they began to talk and think and procreate. Everything went well until the columns holding up the sky eroded. There were cracks which appeared in the sky, and rain poured through and flooded the earth, and everybody was miserable. Mother Nuha had to think again, and she took 5 stones of different colors, kneaded them into various shapes, and plugged the holes in the sky with the stones. She also replaced the columns holding up the sky by cutting off the legs of a giant sea turtle, and those legs did the trick, and everybody lived happily ever afterwards. Well, watch for the next installment of this thrilling tale. Will the great turtle's legs survive the nuclear age, or must Mother Nuha think yet again? The great Emperor Qin Shi Huang, 259 to 210 BC, was the man who unified China during his 49 years of life. He built the Great Wall near Beijing, and he immortalized himself by a tomb here near Xi'an, which has not yet been excavated.
But the adjoining site has been unearthed, and now visitors come from far and wide to see the wonders of the buried army.
It was discovered in 1974 when a farmer was digging for water, digging a well during the great drought. And he came across a head, a clay head, which was so lifelike that he got terrified, and he rushed away to the local administration, who thought he was telling a tall story, but went along anyway. They saw the head, and they brought in the archaeologists, and this great dig started out of a peasant looking for water. So far, they have found 8,000 clay warriors with their horses in serried ranks under the ground, and they are every day discovering more. Also a wonderful chariot built at the same time, 2,000 years ago, a chariot out of bronze with 4 horses and a coachman. They are absolutely extraordinary, these things, because they are so lifelike. They remind you in quality of some of the Greek statues of antiquity, where you stand absolutely dumbfounded in front of them because of their accurate observation of the human physique and of human nature, because the expression on the faces of each one of these is different. Some are anxious, some are frozen in this position. The reins go through the hands of the charioteer, Everybody has a slightly different expression on his face. Some are fearful, some are determined, some are resigned, and some are vigorous, some are, frankly, lazy. It's a wonderful cross-section of human society 2,000 years ago, or if you look closely enough, now.
We leave the 8,000 different personalities of the underground army and make our way to Guilin in Guangxi Autonomous Region, which borders on Vietnam and gives us an image of the Orient we are more familiar with. The paddy fields, peasants half immersed in water, amid verdant foliage, a world of bog and moisture, a far cry from the dust and snow encountered before. The straw hats suggest that a hot sun is guaranteed here, as are these sunsets reflected in the ever-present water. Sometimes a wide expanse, sometimes merely a dazzling dagger stroke among the reeds. And these strange conical hills, thrown up by the limestone seabed millennia ago, add to China's unique treasury of caves.
I don't wish to offend anyone, but the Chinese have it over the Irish with their leprechauns and the Norwegians with their little people, who will prevent you occasionally, the Norwegians, from throwing used shaving water onto the grass in case it scalds the little people. And the leprechauns are very real to the Irish, but here in Guilin, in the south of China, are these amazing caves of limestone with stalagmites and stalactites that have been formed over the years and nibbled at by nature. They're under these strange conical shapes we see outside. Enormous caves like organ lofts, and one can see all sorts of things in them. Even as a non-Chinese, one can see monastic washing hanging up to dry, strange dragons and creatures from other worlds, all attacking each other, cajoling each other, being playful with one another. The Chinese are very fanciful, to such an extent that my guidebook even said that the sight of the moon reflected in water around here inspired a blind poet to write about it. Well, that is carrying fancy into the realm of poetry itself. And the Chinese are very conscious of all sorts of supernatural things, the things round the corner. So an enormous carp may suddenly attack a tiny elephant because the stones have formed that way in the middle of a forest. Then, of course, it becomes King Carp, who attacks the princess of the elephants and tries to drive the elephant to do its will by dragging it into the ocean depth. The elephant holds its trunk above water so it continues to breathe and eventually has the better of the carp. And the little stick leading through the carp is actually the dagger, the tusk of the elephant, plunged into the carp, which then transforms itself into some delicious object, and everybody in the cave lives more or less happily ever after. And so it goes on, this extraordinary association of real things with the unreal, and here they all become tangible, visible, frightening, and friendly according to your attitude.
We've seen rugged mountains disappearing into impenetrable cloud, plains melting into a quivering horizon, and now from the epic, the grandiloquent, to the deeply felt and crystal clear, the recurrent intimacies of this subtropical landscape. The Li River flows magically through this amazing countryside, but it's inhabited by river folk who appear to take it for granted. After all, they've never seen anything else. They must think all rivers are like this one, a pasture for water buffalo to amble in, a place to plunge for the tourist's daily ration of green vegetables, or to catch fish by means of cormorants, used as freshwater falcons. They are sent to catch the fish, then dragged back aboard the sampan. A string around their neck prevents them swallowing their quarry. They are forced to cough it up. If reincarnation should exist, one can imagine pickpockets coming back to Earth as cormorants. Successful robbery without profit. A hideous destiny. It is the virtuous travelers who eat the fish. But perhaps they were repentant cormorants in a previous life. Who knows? They're going to love this. After all, they don't know what it is.
This is known as a little paradise, and I can really quite understand why, even though the guidebook charmingly says it is alleged to be the most beautiful part of the world. But this is a matter of taste. Well, my taste gravitates towards that of the guidebook. It is an extraordinary part of the world which changes every 5 seconds, and round every corner one sees something different. It's a very extraordinary experience to be at the last leg of this journey, having only 5 days ago been among people whom the local authorities were rather frightened of our impact on them because they had evidently never seen anything but other Chinese. Here, we're already subject to the lucrative pollution of tourists. They create no surprise anymore to anyone. They wear their Chinese hats and badges and loose-limbed garments, stuff which they wear here but won't know what to do with when they get home. And it's quite a curious contrast to go so quickly from a world as Marco Polo knew it to the world as Thomas Cook knows it. However, that doesn't spoil the intrinsic niceness of the people, although you feel the difference when they have come into contact with the outside world, nor has it spoiled the enchantment of the landscape. In China, there's a legend for every moment of the day, for every location, and in every possible situation. And this river, of course, has its share. One of them being that sailors drowned in this river, and it takes some effort because it's very shallow. They are transformed into demons, and they clutch at the bottom of the boat as it starts to struggle against the rapids. I would add a legend of my own, which I've just thought of. Any tourist overboard is transformed into a demon and clutches at his or her camera as the wash begins to envelop them.
Piper of planting.
There's so much to remember. So many knots in so many handkerchiefs. A few hints of the mammoth pageant of China's history. But perhaps most impressive of all, China's future. The children. The consequences of that glorious past. Good-humored, generous, hospitable, and good at games. They welcome you with pleasure. Say goodbye with just the right hint of regret.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
To make you wish to return before you have left.
Well, here we are at our journey's end in Hong Kong. It seems incredible that so little time ago we were in caves with people that had never seen a face from another race, a face from another part of China even. And this is a highly developed part of the world. They're very proud of it, and rightly so. They've worked very hard, and they've created an extraordinary, concentrated society here. But it reminds one of the Tower of Babel a little bit, because there are so many people from various parts of the world strutting around and looking for opportunities in shops, in bargain basements all over the place, in tiny cubby holes in the wall, looking for opportunities, much like pigeons on a pavement looking for bits of bread that have been dropped inadvertently. It's as though the Tower of Babel had had shopping arcades.
1997, Hong Kong will be united with her long-lost parent, China. How will the two mentalities cohabit? Well, from Hong Kong, we learn how far we have come and what we have gained. From the heart of China, we learn how far others have come and what they have lost. In the kind of sensational progress described by the term, the Great Leap Forward, we're reminded that one foot is still airborne, even if the other is reluctant to follow. China is suddenly a land of immense opportunity instead of a closed book. And with the kind of goodwill that we've experienced wherever we went, no solution is impossible in this family reunion.